The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a big, cold place. The ceiling was so high that the lights near the top looked like distant stars. The walls were made of dark stone that had been polished for hundreds of years. Delegates from more than 40 species sat in long curved rows, each with their own table, their own flags, their own screens. The room smelled like recycled air and old power. Day One sat at the human table. It was the smallest table in the room. It had always been the smallest table in the room. He had noticed that on his first day, 60 years after humanity joined the council, and he had noticed it every single day since. He never said anything about it. There was no point. He was a tall man with short gray hair and calm eyes. He wore the dark blue coat of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, pressed and clean. He sat with his hands flat on the table and he looked straight ahead while the voting numbers appeared on the big screen above the speaker's platform. 14 against, 2 in favor. The petition was rejected. The petition had asked the council for permission to colonize 5 empty star systems in the outer fringe. Nobody lived there. No species had claimed them. The systems had been surveyed, mapped, and reviewed by Terran science teams over 20 years. They were safe. They were ready. And Earth needed them. 18 billion people lived on a planet that was running out of room. The need was not political. It was simple survival. The petition had been sitting in the council queue for 11 years. Grand Speaker Vorik read the result in a flat voice. He was a tall alien, gray-skinned, with small yellow eyes and a long neck. He did not look up when he spoke. He did not look at the human table at all. He moved on to the next item on the agenda as if the vote had been about something small, like adjusting a parking schedule on a minor station. In a side corridor just off the main hall, 2 council members were talking quietly. Thessan, the Myrati treasurer, leaned close to Orville of the Kelthari Collective and said what everyone already knew. Humans expanded too fast. They were productive. They were smart. They solved problems quickly and they reproduced quickly and they built things quickly. That made them hard to manage. Better to keep them small. Better to keep them where they were. Orville agreed with a short nod and said nothing more. Back inside the hall, Juno watched Day One from the gallery above. Juno was 29 years old. He was the youngest council liaison Earth had ever assigned to Verith Prime. He had grown up believing in the council the way some people believe in a religion. He had studied its history. He had memorized its treaties. He had told anyone who would listen that the Galactic Council, for all its flaws, was the best system the galaxy had. He watched Day One gather his papers slowly. He watched him straighten his coat. He watched him turn and walk toward the door with the same calm, unhurried step he always used. Day One did not look angry. He did not look sad. His face showed nothing at all. Juno followed him out into the corridor. The corridor outside the Grand Hall was white and wide. Other delegates walked past them, talking to each other, checking screens. Nobody looked at Day One. Nobody stopped to say anything. Juno caught up and walked beside him. He tried to think of the right words. He had always been good with words. Right now he could not find any. "What do we do now?" he finally asked. Day One did not slow down. He did not turn his head. "We go home," he said. Those 3 words sat in the air between them. Juno waited for more. There was no more. That evening, in his small office near the human residential block on the station, Day One sat at his desk and typed a single message. It was short. It used no dramatic language. It named no enemies and made no threats. It was addressed to Yuna, who was back on Earth, who had been waiting for this message for 4 years, who had a plan ready and waiting like a loaded ship at a docking port. The message said, "Authorized." Yuna was a small, quiet woman who worked in an office that had no windows. She ran the Terran Strategic Withdrawal Committee, which was not listed in any public council directory. Her team had spent 4 years building a plan she called Protocol Severance. The plan was based on one simple idea. The most powerful thing humanity could do was not fight. It was not argue. It was not make speeches or write letters or stage protests in the council gallery. The most powerful thing humanity could do was stop showing up. No announcements, no declarations, no angry words at the council podium. Just a clean, quiet, professional exit. Done the way humans did everything, carefully, completely, and without waste. She read Daewon's message. She read it once. Then she opened her operational files and began sending orders. Back on the station, Juno sat alone in the gallery for a long time after everyone else had left. The grand hall was empty now. The big voting screen had gone dark. The smallest table in the room sat there in the quiet, just as it always had. He thought about the 11 years. He thought about the surveys and the reports and the formal petitions and the polite follow-up letters. He thought about every time a human delegate had sat at that small table and spoken clearly and been ignored politely. He thought about the human medical teams who had worked for 3 years to stop a plague on a council world and received a brief written thank you and nothing more. He thought about the patrol routes, the engineering contracts, the food shipments, the navigation systems, all of it flowing quietly outward from Earth while the council voted 14-2. He did not feel angry. He felt something quieter than anger, something heavier. He stood up and walked out of the gallery. He had a transport to catch. He was going home too. The station hummed around him as he walked. Thousands of beings from dozens of species moved through its corridors, going about their lives, not thinking about the human table, not thinking about what the vote had meant, not thinking about the message that was already traveling at light speed toward a woman sitting in a windowless office on Earth. Nobody was thinking about it yet. They would be soon. Yuna had one rule when she built Protocol Severance. No noise. She had explained it to her team on the very first day 4 years ago, when the committee was still just 5 people sitting around a folding table in a basement office. She had drawn a simple picture on a whiteboard. On one side she drew a fist. On the other side she drew an empty chair. Then she asked her team which one the council would be more afraid of. Most of them pointed at the fist. She pointed at the empty chair. A fist, she told them, was something the council could respond to. They could call it aggression. They could rally their members. They could write angry statements and hold emergency votes and feel important. An empty chair gave them nothing to fight against. An empty chair just sat there and made them wonder. So the plan had no fights in it. No ultimatums. No dramatic exits. Just a slow, clean, professional withdrawal, carried out by thousands of humans across council space, each doing their small part, none of them making a scene. It started in week 1 with the medical teams. Human doctors and nurses had been working on joint council stations and colony outposts for decades. There were over 4,000 of them spread across council space. Under Protocol Severance, each team was given quiet instructions. Finish your current patients. Complete your paperwork. File your final reports in full. Then book a transport home. Nobody was told to leave in a hurry. Nobody was told to be rude or to refuse care. Every patient who was already being treated was seen through to the end. It was done the way Yuna had always intended. Responsibly, professionally, and without drama. Myri oversaw it personally. She was the head of the Terran Science and Aid Consortium, a tall woman with steady hands and a habit of speaking very precisely. She traveled to 3 stations herself to make sure the handoffs were done correctly. At each one, she transferred patient files to the local council medical staff, logged everything, and then quietly revoked Terran system access. Not as sabotage, she always made clear, but as standard data security protocol. Council staff no longer employed by the consortium did not need Terran system access. That was simple procedure. She was polite about it every time. She smiled and shook hands and wished everyone well. Then she boarded her ship and moved on to the next station. In week 2, Admiral Hain began pulling human patrol vessels from the outer corridor. The outer corridor was the longest trade route in council space. It connected 47 worlds across 3 sectors and passed through 3 regions that had been dangerous for as long as anyone could remember. Piracy, smuggling, territorial disputes, the corridor had all of it. For 15 years, human vessels had run rotating patrols through the area. Not because the council had formally asked them to. Because humanity had offered, and the council had quietly accepted, and the arrangement had simply continued. Hain was a short woman with gray-streaked hair and a very direct way of speaking. She filed the patrol rotation change through the standard military scheduling office. She cited routine fleet maintenance and crew rotation requirements. Both of those things were true. She did not say when the patrol vessels would return. She filed a replacement schedule that was technically accurate. It listed no replacement ships. It just listed the schedule itself, which showed nothing scheduled. Nobody in the Council military office caught it for 5 days. When they did, they filed a query to the Terran Fleet Coordination Desk. The Terran Fleet Coordination Desk sent back an automated response saying the desk was currently in administrative review and to expect a reply within a standard processing window. The processing window was not listed. By week 3, the engineering situation was becoming clear to anyone paying close attention. Dozens of Council stations ran on systems built by Terran engineers. Life support, power regulation, atmospheric management, water recycling. Human engineering firms had won contracts for these systems over many years because they were reliable, efficient, and relatively affordable. The contracts had renewal clauses. The renewal clauses had been handled quietly every year by human administrative staff. This year, they had simply not been renewed. Human engineers on those stations finished their current work orders. They cleaned their tools. They filed their final maintenance logs. Then they packed their things and boarded transports home. They did it in small groups spread out over 2 weeks, so it did not look like a mass departure. From the outside, it looked like normal staff turnover. In the civilian sector, Juno coordinated a quieter kind of departure. Human civilians living and working across Council space. Researchers, traders, teachers, technicians received messages from their home districts on Earth. Extended family leave programs had been opened. Free transport was available. New opportunities were waiting at home. Nobody was ordered to leave. The message never said anything about a withdrawal. It just reminded people that home was there and that the door was open. Humans, it turned out, were quite good at reading between lines. The transports filled up quickly. Liney noticed the numbers before anyone else on the Council side. She was a junior Myrati diplomat, young by her species standards, with pale green skin and large dark eyes that missed very little. She had always made a point of talking to the human staff on the station. She liked them. They were direct and funny, and they worked harder than almost anyone else she had ever met. When she started seeing familiar faces disappear, she ran a count. Then she ran it again. The human presence on Verith Prime had dropped by 60% in 3 weeks. She filed a report. She flagged it clearly. She sent it up the chain to her direct superior, who sent it to a Council Administrative Review Board, who logged it and moved on. When the report eventually reached Vorik, he read the summary, set it aside, and told his aide that humans always sulked after a bad vote. They would come back. They needed the Council too much to do anything dramatic. They always came back. He moved on to his next meeting. By the end of week 6, fewer than 200 humans remained anywhere in Council space. All of them were on their way to transport ships. On the last day, Day 1 sat at his desk on Verith Prime for the final time. The office was clean. The shelves were empty. The small potted plant that had sat on the windowsill for 3 years was already on a ship. He typed one last document. It was formal and correct. It used the proper Council diplomatic language. It thanked the Council for 60 years of membership. It stated clearly that Earth was exercising its right to voluntary withdrawal. It was signed, dated, and filed with the Council Secretariat through the standard submission portal. Then he stood up, picked up his bag, and walked out. The document sat in the Secretariat's incoming queue. Nobody looked at it for 3 days. When a junior clerk finally opened it and read it, she sat very still for a long moment. Then she walked down the hall to find her supervisor. It started with a smell. On Station Revath 9, a mid-sized Council waypoint in the southern trading lanes, the air started to taste different. Not bad exactly, just slightly off. Like something that had been clean for a long time was slowly becoming less clean. Nobody could point to the exact moment it started. It had just arrived gradually, the way bad things often do. The station's chief engineer, a wide-bodied Kelthari named Bras, ran a diagnostic. The atmospheric regulators were throwing warnings. Not critical warnings. Not yet. Just the kind of small yellow alerts that meant the system wanted attention. He pulled up the maintenance panel and stared at it for a while. The interface was written in Terran engineering language. The component diagrams referenced parts with Terran catalog numbers. The repair protocol tree was structured around a Terran maintenance logic system that his own engineering team had never been trained on because there had never been a need. The humans had always handled it. He filed a maintenance request to the Terran engineering contractor on record. The automated response came back in 4 minutes. The Terran Engineering Services contract for Station Revath 9 had reached its end date and had not been renewed. For further technical support, please contact the Terran Trade Office. The Terran Trade Office response came back in 2 hours. External service contracts were currently paused pending internal review. A request form was available. The estimated response time for request forms was not listed. Bross stared at both messages for a long time. Then he forwarded them to his station director and went back to the atmospheric panel and started trying to figure out the system himself. The station director forwarded the messages to the Council Infrastructure Committee. The Infrastructure Committee logged them and sent a query to the Terran Liaison Office on Vareth Prime. There was no longer a Terran Liaison Office on Vareth Prime. The message bounced. On 6 other stations across Council space, almost the same thing happened in almost the same week. The specific systems were different: power regulators on one, water recycling on another, communication relay arrays on a third. The common thread was the same. The systems were Terran designed, Terran maintained, and the Terran engineers were gone. The Council's own engineers were smart. They were not incompetent. But years of relying on human specialists had meant that nobody else had gone deep into these systems. Why would they? The humans had it handled. That had always been enough of an answer. It was not enough now. The outer corridor situation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 10 days of the last human patrol vessel leaving the route, the first piracy report came in. A cargo vessel carrying grain shipments from a Terran-partnered agricultural world was stopped and boarded near the midpoint of the corridor. The pirates were quick and professional. They had clearly been watching the patrol schedules. They knew exactly when the gap had opened. Within 3 weeks, there were 9 more incidents. The Kelthari Collective, which had the largest military presence among Council species after humanity, dispatched 6 warships to cover the route. The warships were impressive. They were modern. They were crewed by well-trained soldiers. The pirates ignored them. Orville received the daily incident reports at his desk in the Council military wing. He read each one carefully. He had spent years rolling his eyes at human military style. Too simple, he had always said. Too blunt. Humans relied on presence and reputation instead of elegant tactical systems. Real military power was about strategy. What he was learning now was that presence was a strategy. The human patrol ships had not been stopping pirates because they were always catching pirates. They had been stopping pirates because every pirate in the outer corridor knew that the humans were there, knew what the humans would do, and decided not to test it. That reputation had been built over 15 years of consistent, patient, reliable patrol work. It could not be replaced in 3 weeks by 6 warships from a species that had never patrolled the corridor before. The pirates knew that. The Council was learning it. On a Myra-T colony world called Harith III, a respiratory illness broke out in the northern settlements. This was not unusual. The outer colony worlds dealt with outbreaks regularly. The standard response was to request the treatment compound from the Terran Pharmaceutical Network, which had developed the compound 12 years ago, which produced it exclusively in facilities on Earth and 2 Terran partner worlds, and which had always shipped it quickly and without complication. The Myra-T Colonial Health Office sent the standard request. The Terran Pharmaceutical Export Queue was currently suspended pending review of international trade agreements. The automated message was polite. It was thorough. It explained nothing useful. The Myra-T Health Office escalated. Then escalated again. Then sent an emergency flag directly to the Council Medical Committee. The Council Medical Committee contacted the Terran Medical Liaison. There was no longer a Terran Medical Liaison. The message bounced. On Harith III, the illness spread to the southern settlements. Thessan sat in his office in the Council Financial District and pulled a report he had been putting off reading for 3 years. His own analysts had prepared it. They had titled it carefully, in the driest possible language, to make sure nobody would feel alarmed when they saw it on a shelf. It was called the Terran Economic Dependency Assessment, Volume 3 of 4. He read it in one sitting. Humans represented 34% of total council GDP. They held manufacturing rights to 61 categories of goods that no other council species had successfully replicated. Their agricultural export network fed 9 worlds that could not grow enough food on their own. Their navigational AI systems managed the most efficient routing corridors in council space. Their medical research covered more than half of all multi-species treatment protocols currently in active use. The report was 3 years old. Every number in it had grown since then. Thessan closed the file. He sat very still. Through his office window he could see the main plaza of Verith Prime. Busy as always, delegates and traders and station staff moving in every direction. Everything looked normal. That was the worst part. Everything looked completely normal. He picked up the report. He walked down 3 corridors to the Grand Speaker's office. Vorik's aide tried to tell him the speaker was in a meeting. Thessan walked past the aide without stopping. He opened the door, walked in, and set the report on Vorik's desk without saying a word. Vorik looked up, annoyed. Then he looked at the cover of the report. Then he started reading. For the first time in his long career as Grand Speaker of the Galactic Council, Vorik had nothing to say. The emergency session was called with 1 day's notice, which was almost unheard of. Council sessions usually took weeks to schedule. There were procedures and agendas and formal notification requirements. This time, Vorik's office sent a single short message to every active delegate. Be here tomorrow. Not all of them could come. 6 delegates were dealing with crises on their home worlds or colony stations. 3 could not make the journey because the most efficient transit routes through council space were managed by Terran navigational AI systems that had stopped responding to outside requests. They sent written statements instead. The chamber felt strange with empty seats. The big curved rows looked incomplete. Even the human table, the smallest one in the room, seemed to matter more now that it was empty. Nobody sat near it. Vorik opened the session without ceremony. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. His gray skin seemed duller. He spoke in a flat voice and laid out the situation plainly. The infrastructure failures, the medical shortages, the outer corridor breakdown, the economic numbers. He presented it all without trying to shape it or soften it. Then he said that the most logical immediate step was to reach out to humanity through diplomatic backchannels and request a temporary continuation of services while both parties discussed the terms of the withdrawal. He said it like it was a reasonable idea. Thessan let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke. There were no backchannels, he said. Every formal diplomatic channel ran through the council secretariat, which now had no human staff to contact. Every informal backchannel had run through human diplomatic personnel who were no longer on the station. The last known direct contact number for the Terran ambassador's office rang to a message saying the office was no longer in service and to direct all inquiries to the Terran Trade Office. Vorik asked about the Terran Trade Office. Thessan told him about the form, and the queue, and the response time that was not listed. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Orville spoke next. He was a big, broad-shouldered alien with a military officer's habit of getting to the point quickly. He said the council should consider a show of force at the edge of human space. Not an invasion, not a war, just a visible fleet presence to remind Earth that it remained subject to council authority and that unilateral withdrawal had consequences. He said it in a measured voice. He believed it was a practical option. A junior military analyst named Tevith, who had been invited to the session specifically to provide technical briefings, was quiet for a moment after Orville finished. Then he spoke carefully. He said that the Council's combined fleet had never engaged a human military force in any direct conflict. He said that human defensive doctrine had never been formally assessed under real combat conditions. He said that every joint wargame simulation run in the last 20 years, most of which humanity had participated in designing, had produced results that the Council's own military review board had classified as not suitable for general distribution. He did not say what those results showed. He did not need to. Everyone in the room could read the silence around those words. Orville did not raise the fleet option again. The session moved through 3 more proposals, each of which collapsed under examination for similar reasons. A trade embargo would hurt Council worlds more than Earth, because Earth's trade dependencies ran inward, not outward. A formal complaint to interstellar law bodies would take years and produce no immediate relief. Freezing Terran assets within Council space would require human cooperation to execute, since most Terran assets were registered through human legal systems that no longer recognized Council authority over them. The Council had spent 60 years deciding where humanity sat and how much it mattered. It had made those decisions from a position of assumed authority. Now it was discovering, proposal by proposal, that the authority it had assumed was mostly real in the direction of controlling humans, but almost entirely fictional in the direction of surviving without them. Liney had been sitting near the back of the chamber. She was not a senior delegate. She had been invited by Thessan, who had remembered her report about the declining human presence and felt guilty that it had been ignored. When there was a pause, she raised her hand. Vorik, who did not know her well, almost moved past her. Thessan caught the speaker's eye and gave a small nod. Vorik called on her. Liney stood. She was young and the chamber was large, and she spoke in a clear, steady voice anyway. She said that the Council had spent this entire session trying to find ways to restore what humanity provided without addressing why humanity had left. She said that every proposal discussed had treated humanity as a resource that needed to be returned to service rather than as a partner that had been failed. She said that the question was not how to bring humans back. The question was why they had left, and whether the Council was willing to honestly answer that question before it asked anything of Earth. She said that in her 3 years as a Council diplomat she had watched human delegates be talked over, voted down, ignored, and assigned the smallest table in the chamber as a matter of long-standing architectural tradition. She said that she had watched humanity give the Council everything it asked for and receive in return a 60-year pattern of being managed rather than respected. She said she did not think the humans had walked away in anger. She thought they had walked away because they had finally decided their energy was worth more than what the Council was giving them for it. She sat down. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then several people spoke at once, and Vorik had to call for order. But the silence before the noise had been a different kind of silence than any the chamber had heard that day. It was the silence of people who had just heard something true that they did not want to be true, which was the most uncomfortable kind of truth there was. Back on Earth, Juno sat in a monitoring room in the Terran Strategic Operations Center, watching the incoming data feeds from Council space. Reports from the outer corridor. Status updates from Myrati health officials trying to reach Myri's team. Infrastructure alerts from 7 stations. He watched the numbers and the messages and the automated query chains running in circles because there was nobody on the other end to answer them. He had expected to feel something sharp when this moment came. Satisfaction, maybe, or the cold, clean feeling of a decision proven right. Instead, he felt heavy, not guilty, just tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. Yuna was sitting across the room, updating her models. She had barely left this building in 3 weeks. She worked the way she always worked, quietly, completely, without visible emotion. Juno asked her, without really planning to, whether any of it could have been avoided. Yuna stopped typing. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. Not quickly, not to fill the silence. She actually considered the question. It was avoidable, she said. It was avoidable every single time the Council had a chance to treat humanity like a real partner. Every bad vote, every ignored report, every meeting where a human delegate spoke and nobody listened. Any one of those moments could have been different. The Council just kept choosing not to make them different. Juno nodded slowly. He turned back to the screens. In a secure briefing room down the hall, Day 1 sat with Hain and Myri and a rotating group of advisors. They were not celebrating. They were working. The question on the table was not whether to return. The question was whether to ever engage with the Council again, and if so, on exactly what terms. Myri laid the humanitarian numbers on the table. Millions of ordinary people on Council worlds who had never cast a vote, never sat in the Grand Chamber, never had any say in how their governments had treated humanity, were now suffering for decisions they did not make. That mattered. It mattered to her very specifically, and she said so. The others listened. It mattered to them too. The decision they reached that night was not soft. But it was considered. And it was human in the most complete sense of the word, built equally from strength and from conscience, which was the combination that had always made humanity, in the end, impossible to simply set aside. The ship was not a warship. It was a mid-sized diplomatic transport, white-hulled, clean-lined, carrying no weapons beyond the standard short-range defense systems that all Terran vessels carried as a matter of course. It entered Council space from the direction of Earth without any dramatic announcement, broadcasting on all standard Council frequencies in a calm, measured tone. It identified itself as the TDV Hangang, registered to the Terran Diplomatic Corps, carrying 3 passengers on official business. The Council tracking stations picked it up immediately. Half a dozen military vessels were scrambled to intercept. The intercept order was pulled back within minutes on Vorik's direct instruction, because the one thing nobody needed right now was an incident. The Hangang did not go to Varith Prime. Instead, it transmitted coordinates, a small neutral station in unclaimed space, 3 hours from the edge of Council territory, belonging to no species and administered by a minor independent guild that was not affiliated with the Council. The message that accompanied the coordinates was brief. The Terran delegation would be waiting there. If the Council wished to speak, the Council knew where to come. Vorik received the message in his office. He read it twice. His aide watched him carefully. He said it was unacceptable. A Grand Speaker did not travel to meet a withdrawing member. It was unprecedented. It was beneath the dignity of his office and of the Council itself. He said all of this in a firm, clear voice, and he meant every word of it. Then Thessan came to see him. Then Orville. Then 9 other senior delegates, one after another, each of them saying the same thing in their own way. The Myrati colony on Harith 3 had reported its 3rd death from the respiratory outbreak. The atmospheric regulators on Revath 9 had moved from yellow alerts to orange. 2 more cargo ships had been hit in the outer corridor. Vorik went. He told his aide it was purely a practical decision. He told the Council press office to describe it as a goodwill gesture. He told himself whatever he needed to tell himself on the 3-hour journey to a neutral station in unclaimed space, where 3 humans were waiting for him with a document and a very clear idea of how the conversation was going to go. The station was small and plain. Its main meeting room had a long table, basic chairs, and lights that were slightly too bright. Day 1, Myri and Juno were already seated on one side when the Council delegation arrived. Day 1 had a folder in front of him. Myri had a data tablet. Juno had a cup of water and a calm expression that had cost him some effort to arrange. The Council delegation was larger, 11 delegates, including Vorik, Thessan, Orville, and Liney, who had been added to the list at Thessan's request and over Vorik's mild objection. They sat down. There was a brief, uncomfortable moment while everyone arranged themselves. Then Vorik began to speak. Day 1 let him speak for about 45 seconds. Then he quietly opened his folder and placed a document in the center of the table. He said it was called the Terran Framework for Renewed Engagement. He said he would explain what was in it. It was not a list of punishments. It was not a list of demands written in the language of victory. It was a structural document. Contract. It laid out the terms under which humanity would re-engage with the Council as a full member, and it was written with the same clean, practical language that Terran legal teams had always used, precise, complete, and free of the kind of vague language that could be reinterpreted later by someone sitting in a comfortable chair who had not been at this table. The framework required formal veto rights for humanity on any Council decision affecting Terran territorial expansion. It required equal table placement, equal speaking time, and equal voting weight across all Council chambers. It required binding arbitration for all trade disputes involving Terran goods or services, administered by a neutral panel that included Terran representatives. It required that all Council economic dependency assessments be maintained as public record, updated annually, and available to every member species. In exchange, Terran medical services would resume within 72 hours of signing. Patrol routes would be re-established within 2 weeks. Engineering support for Council infrastructure would continue under new contracts with proper terms. Agricultural exports would resume on a graduated schedule tied to the signing timeline. Day 1 explained all of this in a pleasant voice. He did not raise it. He did not lower it. He spoke the way he had spoken in council chambers for years, clearly, patiently, with the particular kind of calm that comes not from having nothing to say but from having already decided exactly how to say it. When he finished, Vorik said it was extortion. Day 1 said it was a contract. He noted, with the same pleasant tone, that humanity had been operating without one for 60 years. The room was quiet for a moment. Thessan said he had questions about the arbitration clause. Day 1 turned to him and answered them directly. Orville asked about the patrol route timeline. Hain, who had been patched in via secure audio from Earth, answered him. Liney asked no questions. She read the document carefully and then set it down and folded her hands and waited. The vote, when it came, was not close. 15 delegates voted for the framework. Vorik voted against it. He said nothing after the vote was counted. He signed the document when it was passed to him because he was a practical man above all things, and the situation was what it was. Myri left on a medical transport within the hour. Her team was already loaded and ready. They had been ready for 3 days. She reached Harith 3 within the promised 72 hours. The treatment compound was in the colony's medical storage before the end of the day. By the end of the week, the outbreak was contained. When the Myrati Council delegate thanked her in a public statement, she responded graciously. She said she was glad to help. She did not say anything more than that. She did not need to. On Verith Prime, the council chamber was quietly reconfigured over the following week. The new layout placed all delegation tables at equal size in a proper circle. It had been Liney's idea, submitted formally as an administrative suggestion, approved in a subcommittee vote that Vorik had not bothered to attend. The old arrangement, she had written in her submission, was a tradition whose purpose had long since expired. Nobody argued with her. Juno was back at his monitoring post in the operations center when the first human patrol vessel re-entered the outer corridor. He watched the tracking display. The ship moved along the familiar route, steady and unhurried, broadcasting on the standard patrol frequencies. Somewhere along the corridor, a ship that had been considering its options quietly changed course and went somewhere else. He sat there for a while and watched more ships follow. The route began to breathe again the way it had for 15 years, the way it would now continue to do under different terms than before. Day 1 came in without knocking, the way he always did. He stood beside Juno and looked at the display. For a while neither of them spoke. Juno asked eventually whether it had been worth it. Day 1 thought about it the way he thought about everything, fully, without rushing, giving the question the weight it deserved. He said, "Ask me in 100 years." They would know by then whether the council had actually learned anything, or whether it had simply adjusted its behavior for as long as the memory of an empty chamber was still fresh. He walked away. His footsteps were quiet on the floor. Juno stayed at the screen a little longer. He watched the patrol ship reach the midpoint of the corridor and begin its slow, steady turn. He watched the route light up, stop by stop, as the network woke back up. He thought about the smallest table in the grand chamber. He thought about a vote that had been 14-2. He thought about 11 years and a petition and a very short walk down a corridor, and 3 words that had set all of this in motion. Outside the window, the earth turned in the dark the way it always had, slowly, quietly, with complete indifference to whether the rest of the galaxy was paying attention. It always had been worth paying attention.